Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Eric is tangled up in traffic somewhere in the neighborhood of Wendell, and he'll be here as quickly as he can, so we're going to go ahead and get going. First item is the approval of the agenda. We want to add item 4, manager's comment. Other than that, I have nothing. So,
I move we adopt the agenda.
okay.
Second.
Made, second, all in favor? Motion carries. Old business, draft comprehensive plan, land use, transportation chapter update. Michael?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. As you recall, over the past year and some change, we've been working on revising our comprehensive land use plan as well as our transportation plan. Our last comprehensive plan was established in 2008, and due to its age, the demographic changes, and the amount of growth that we've had within the town, it is well past due for replacement. Additionally, the transportation plan, which essentially tells what size the roads need to be in context with what the future land use will be, was also outdated. So we contracted with a team of Remy Kemp and Associates and Kendig Keast to rewrite both plans. And we've had several public events through the past year, some in person, some virtual, but we were able to gather quite a bit of information. And tonight is the first of the presentations of what those draft plans look like. Everybody should at their place have a copy of the draft comprehensive land use plan. There's one additional section that's going to be included, but part of that section is going to be dependent upon the discussion tonight. And then once those details are finalized, we'll be able to complete the transportation plan. We do anticipate this going to joint public hearing on May 10th with a possible June 3rd adoption. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Gary Mitchell from Kendig Keast to kick off the land use portion, and then Jessica McClure from Remy Kemp and Associates will be able to provide the information regarding the transportation plan.
Thank you, Mike, and good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I can tell you that because I'm only here every few months with all our COVID disruptions and with the pace of change in Zebulon, you see major leaps of change when you're visiting that infrequently. So there's a lot going on. Good to be with you again tonight and in person. Once again, names with faces, Jessica and myself. Jessica will follow me on the transportation focus. And really, as Mike said, tonight is really about highlights. As you can see, there's a lot of content typically in these comprehensive plans as well as the transportation plan, so we'll try and hit some of the highlights for you. And as mentioned, that next step is to go to the planning board, see if they're ready to recommend to you so it can go to public hearing and come before the board officially. So we'll tell you more about that at the end. But very quickly, just wanted to remind that certainly you see a lot of studies and plans that come before the board. This is the one that is kind of the umbrella, the big picture over all of the town's activities. And this list is some of the typical ways that the comprehensive plan is used, and especially by staff, and especially Michael's staff when it comes to zoning, subdivision, development review. And I always like to reinforce this point. I'm sometimes asked by town boards and city councils at this point, if we adopt this plan, is everything on paper in this document going to happen? It's meant to be a guidance document and to plant a lot of seeds for the next 10, 20 years. But really, most everything in that plan ultimately comes back to you because it's a budget item. It's something that might require going after a grant and needing some local match, certainly ordinances that are adopted and amended. So everything that comes from this plan adoption still often comes back to you as specific items to implement. So once again, these were the focus areas of the plan, all those physical pieces of a town, especially a growing town like Zebulon. We also prepared the plan with a Zebulon today focus, where you are today as a community, then turn to Zebulon tomorrow. So we'll walk you through some of those pieces. I'm not going to spend as much time on the Zebulon today focus. That's really where we were back in December when we last presented. But that section has certainly some of the history of the town, but a lot of data and maps, just that background information about where you are. But also part of that was to recap all the input that we received. When I was here in December, I mentioned to you that even with the impacts of COVID and that disruption, I feel like we had a really solid base of input and information to build this plan on. And these were some of those activities. Before COVID hit us back in the spring of last year, we did have the one town hall meeting. Those were the days in person at the north side of town. And we've met with you now 3 times with today. But it was really that round of sessions we did downtown in September, outdoors and distanced, but using the what is a so much more improved alley now, but had 12 small groups cycle through that space over the course of a week. Got a tremendous bit of input. If there's anything you come away with tonight, I hope you'll see there's that 17-page list of all the thoughts and ideas that came in, and I hope you see those within the plan document. Those really are built into the plan. In that introduction section, there's also some guiding principles that we had brought before you in December. We fleshed those out. Just the key words are here, but certainly we talked about being a more connected community, from transportation to just on a personal level. There's a lot of discussion about people wanting to have places to gather, and certainly the focus on downtown. The grounded part really gets to your history and just the basic values that came through in our community discussions. Balance touches on everything from a balanced economy, balanced land use pattern and tax base. Prudent is certainly something that comes to this board and as you're thinking about your budgeting and financial resources, but how you go about your decisions. Collaborative is part of that as a growing town and with your need to find ways to finance growth. It's all those partnerships, public and private, that are out there, and certainly collaborative within the town and all your local partners. And resilient, once again, is economy, environment, just all those ways that you're trying to be a town that's nimble, adaptable as things come at you, as they do. So in each of the topic sections of the plan, there are goals, and then there are policies, and then under those are action items. And as I mentioned, some of these are not something you would do next week, next year. They are seeds planted for down the road, but they're things that people mention they wish the town could do or accomplish someday, so they are now captured in the plan. And they're also itemized in these 5 types of action. I'll circle back to this a little later. In the growth section, there is a population projection, and as we've discussed with staff, this is not an easy exercise when those first 2 lines at the bottom that are fairly flat, that's what your trend was, except for what's happened the last 3 to 5 years. So that trend is out the window, but that number in 2040, you're already past that number. So obviously, the trend that you were on is gone. So what we did instead, those higher curves that ramp up, is just assume some growth rates. So those are based on the growth that you've had in recent years, and then even some other scenarios. And then at the end of the day, we took the midpoint of those 3 highest. So there's some variables here. One is the town certainly annexes land over time, so that will change the equation if there's additional population coming in that way. This is more the trend of what the base of population is in the town right now. So as we always say, when you're trying to project numbers out 20 years, you got to look at this year by year and see how it's going. Look at all the indicators you have, building permits, utility connections, and just see how that trend is really playing out. But this is a basis for thinking about the demands on your services. To put this into perspective, the highest number on that chart was in the 14,000 range. In a lot of ways, I can see that that's not where you're going to be, or it's not going to take till 2040 to get to that number. But to illustrate, if you took the Braemar subdivision, 13 to 14 more of those is what it would take to get to 14,000 population. So that gives you an idea of houses on the ground. And of course, the core of this plan is the future land use map. This is just a clip of it. We do have it ready to bring up on screen later if we wanted to talk about some areas, but some of the big picture things I would highlight on this is just that progression from the core area of town, having a traditional Main Street downtown, what an asset that is for Zebulon. But then that progression all the way out to the edge, the yellows of residential that's happening now along Old Bun and Pippin, but then that next tier of that lighter yellow, it's called suburban residential on the map, and then ultimately reaching that green at the far north and south, which is rural. And that's really thinking about not only to where you might be out to 2040, but as we'll talk about later with the county planning, that really matches trying to keep a rural atmosphere in parts of Wake County. The other thing that shows up on this map more in the northwest, the top left, is certainly the Little River watershed protection. So that's reflected there, all that area in that tan color. That's really, it has a rural designation, but it's especially to protect that watershed and that future reservoir potential. Final item is if you see those blue shades, kind of an aqua color on the east side around Five County Stadium, and we'll talk about this more in the presentation, just a focus on what that area could be. That was one of our first assignments coming into this is how can we do more with that asset and not just have a stadium, but make more of that area. Just the fact that you have a highway interchange there, growth is going to come there, and it's already happening with inquiries. So it's trying to shape that growth and really think about the stadium context. So I'll talk about that a little later. As we put this map together, one thing was that when we started this process, the town had just adopted the Unified Development Ordinance. So really, the plan needed to be in sync with the new zoning and regulations that were in place. And it worked out perfectly because the Unified Development Ordinance really accepts this idea of character, that spectrum from the most rural to the most urban situations with suburban in between. That's very much in the UDO. The other factor was the county, of course, is updating its comprehensive plan. That draft came out late last year, and we have one of the maps here from it, but we really tried to sync with their direction because it's really what was coming together in the town's plan. And I know it's small on that slide, but basically the purple of central Zebulon, it's that idea of really capitalizing on where you already have infrastructure, streets, your core downtown and central area. That yellow around it is that next suburban circle around the town. And then there's those green areas, especially the northwest, once again, for the reservoir area, that are meant to be really a rural atmosphere or semi-rural long-term. So avoiding sprawl. So your emerging plan and the county's plan are very much on the same page. And so this is the legend for the future land use and character map. And once again, it's that spectrum from parks, rural, the most open and green places, through suburban, and then to your downtown area. So that spectrum of different characters within a town. There's also the stadium area mixed use designation, and certainly your industrial designations. We added a suburban business park designation for that future possibility. If you had more of that atmosphere, kind of a campus style development, so that's on the map as well, along with your commercial areas. There is this table in the plan in the land use section that makes the connection from those land use map categories, which are meant to be guidance, and then there's your zoning map, which is legal, regulatory, and there's a one-to-one relationship. There's a category in the future land use map, there's a zoning district on the zoning map, so everything is in sync. And so once we did that mapping effort, just tallied up the acres, and this is how it comes out. First, in terms of just basic land uses on the left, that 72% residential, that will come down because we're putting those big swaths of yellow color on the map. But certainly at certain key corners, commercial will emerge. There'll be zoning requests. Commercial follows rooftops, as we always hear. But certainly the other parts of town in other types of use, commercial and industrial. On the right-hand side is looking at it from more of that character standpoint. And that, to me, seems very much on target, that roughly half of Zebulon, long-term, will kind of be that suburban atmosphere where you are in this part of Wake County. A certain amount, a third of the town is typically what we call auto-urban, kind of those shopping center type environments where you can't avoid it. You need a fair amount of surface parking for shopping and other uses. But then your urban part of the town and that rural part. Now, this is just the current town limits and your ETJ, not that entire larger planning area. So it would be much higher rural if we took in that entire area. So let me walk through the individual plan sections and just hit the goals very quickly in each section. In the land use and development section, there's a goal, and these are abbreviated, by the way, just some of the key thoughts, but land use pattern that advances your other objectives. What that means basically is economic development, wanting to have a good park system, all these other pieces of the plan that are really reflected. That's part of what the future land use map shows, is what your future vision of your community is on a map. And then this is the text side of it. Number 2 goal there is just that idea of if it's a suburban area, then you're aiming for all development in that area to have that suburban character, more of a green look to it. So commercial and residential should have a similar character. In a downtown area, everything should be about walkability, more of a pedestrian orientation, and certainly protecting rural areas. The final point is, of course, the benefit of having done these 2 plans together, land use and transportation. Keep that going and keep that coordination happening as the town develops. Those are the key pieces that have to work together. In the growth capacity section, the goals there are certainly that idea of compact growth, as we talked about in your plan and in Plan Wake. Just trying to keep growth internally, certainly, redevelopment opportunities and infill, but then growing orderly at the edges of town so you can extend your utilities and services in an orderly way. Number 2 is certainly the financial aspect of town government, and that as you grow, that is sustainable for the town, and that there's adequate facilities and services to serve that growth. And number 3 is really focusing on police and fire, EMS, those basic services, and just the support for those as you grow. Next section is the housing and neighborhoods focus. The first goal there is certainly from a quantity standpoint, just all the construction that's happening now, but also the types of housing, prices, styles, sizes, points in life for people, where they are, whether seniors or younger families, that those options are there. In terms of neighborhoods, that they're appealing. And I should mention on that first one, it's that idea of people who would like to live here, and maybe housing is the key piece that they're having some challenges with, or in the future that they have that opportunity. Number 2 is on the neighborhood side, these are people that already work here, that are drawn here for whatever reason, that they love your downtown, they love the parks, to make it appealing for them to live here. 3 is certainly to have safe and comfortable neighborhoods, very typical goal. And number 4 is kind of that balance of making sure your existing neighborhoods stay strong and that they have their value, their integrity, and ensuring that you're getting quality design in your new development. And as we've seen over the process of this plan, you are getting very nice development proposals in terms of mixed housing, just the design, the green spaces that are set aside. So this goal is already in the pipeline from what I've seen. Economic development, there's that resiliency theme again, diversity as well. That's in terms of, when you have one or a few major employers, just making sure that over time there's a variety of ways to generate income, jobs, and certainly revenue for the town. As far as your role as a hub community, whether it's for shopping, for parks, for events, for education, medical, long-term, that this is the place to be in Eastern Wake. So that's one of the goals there. Making sure you have the infrastructure to support that, to support the economic development objectives. There's that 5-county stadium theme again, and I'll as I mentioned, we'll circle back to this. This is a focus of this section. And then that 5th goal, as I said, all the words aren't there, but what it talks about is that even as you grow, the downtown is always the place to go, always the heart of the community, always where there's something to do, something that you want to go to as a resident. And then that final section, recreation and amenities. What I should mention here is, of course, the Parks and Recreation Master Plan has been happening at the same time, all the downtown planning that's going on. So we try to capture the themes of that, but try to not step on their toes since those processes are still going. But And I meant to say at the beginning, I hope you also find, because all of you were able to attend various of our meetings, I hope you find things that you said in this plan, because they are in there. And this is one of them. There was a discussion about being a lifestyle community, which is partly not being a bedroom community, but also that people don't go elsewhere for their leisure time and with their dollars. Let's keep it here. So that's something to work toward over time as you grow. As far as the parks connection, certainly we have that there in terms of both quantity of space and different types of parks and the quality of those spaces. There is a goal to someday have an indoor recreation facility. We have the community center today, but there's been discussions about, just from a size standpoint, limitations on having spectators there for indoor sports. So that's actually part of the 5-county stadium focus. Places and spaces to gather, I mentioned that earlier. That came up over and over in our discussions. As you are revitalizing your downtown and with all the successes happening, keep that rolling. That is such an asset to your community, and just make sure that's sustained success. And the aesthetic aspect is number 6, just being an attractive town. Beautification, that certainly came through as well in our conversations. So what I've done here, this is a lot of information on the slides, but we talked about those 5 categories of action types. So I've just kind of pulled out a sample from the different sections. And just to recap, GC is growth capacity, H&N is housing neighborhoods, economic development, ED, R&A, recreation and amenities. Doesn't show up on this one, but the other one is land use and development. So just some examples of the actions that are under these goals and policies. Certainly, there's the issue of fire station location to serve a town that's growing in different directions and in a bigger area, but thinking ahead to that next fire station. I mean, we're already needing to think about 10 years down the road, where does the next one go? That's one example of a capital investment. Certainly thinking about this greenway focus and trail construction, certainly with partners and as development happens, but that's a definite capital improvements item. But all these different types of larger projects that often are spread out over time by using debt, for example. But these tend to be your bigger ticket items. We sometimes call shovel ready or shovel in the ground type projects. This next slide is programs and initiatives. So this may be things that your town departments do or other organizations in town, but there are some specific things on there. There's been discussion with the transition in the Chamber of Commerce, but as your town government is growing, that economic development position, and just being that lead face for everybody that inquires and wants to be a part of investing in Zebulon. But various other things on this list. That final one we certainly talked about before. We heard that in a number of ways, but just formalizing that, whether it's a business or new residents, that they feel welcome and get plugged in to what's available here. The third category of actions is more the regulatory. This is certainly more of Mike's department when it comes to zoning and subdivision and the other types of regulation. So in each section, we've really itemized, and again, because the Unified Development Ordinance had been adopted just before this, we've really tried to make a connection between the plan and just applying all the good standards that are now in that UDO. So those are itemized in each section. ADU is accessory dwelling units. The UDO, this is a hot topic around the country right now, the whole issue of how you either allow or regulate the garage apartment or a apartment within a home or possibly detached in the backyard. That is addressed in your UDO. So you are ahead of the curve with a lot of cities and towns that are wrestling with how to deal with that issue. But just the point there being, just monitor this ongoing discussion nationwide on how to best handle those. We certainly know about the National Register District issue that's in motion right now, just being ready for the implications of that, and just how you go about historic preservation longer term. So that's some of the items under regulatory. The fourth category really emphasizes, once again, all the partnership opportunities you have and coordination with other levels of government. But one thing that's certainly been a success at the top of the list is just the grants that come through things like hazard planning with the county and other communities. just tapping into all those sources of funding that are out there. One thing that putting on the table as part of economic development is there's not an NC Works Career Center in your town. Could there be someday? So it's those types of things that as you get to be a bigger community, more population, more workers, things that you could have here. With the beautification focus, adding an affiliate of Keep America Beautiful, Keep North Carolina Beautiful, have that next level, your own local affiliate. That's a possibility. That certainly takes volunteers typically that are ready to run with that and really make a commitment. And that brings us to ZDAC, of course. There's your super committed folks and just continuing to work toward that vision of an arts center and all the things they're doing for downtown and elsewhere. Final category, as I mentioned earlier, you see different types of plans, more specialized planning, but the comprehensive plan, the CLUP, certainly points toward more specific planning that could follow in the years ahead, whether it's special area planning. Tourism planning could be a focus of a more robust economic development effort. And there's certainly the emphasis that's in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan about working toward a larger scale community park. So these are just some examples, once again, of how this overall town-wide plan sets the stage for next stages and levels of planning. All right, 5-County Stadium, this is the final piece of this presentation. As I said, this was put on our plate from the beginning. We actually have someone on our staff who has done a fair amount of stadium-type work. He worked on Lambeau Field in Green Bay when that was just a big bowl stadium and a parking lot. Now it's an entertainment area with other activities around it. We've also worked with soccer stadiums that same way. They're kind of just a facility and a bunch of parking. We understand the history of 5-County Stadium, where it is and why it's there. But these